Psych and Spirit, growing one awareness at a time.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Psych and Spirit. This is Dr. Seay, otherwise known as Dr. Seay Dashton or Larissa Seay Dashton. I am back, and it has been a while. I've made, a few episodes of a podcast, my Psych and Spirit podcast, starting in, I think, late 2021. I'm back, and I'm back on video. I'm back because of what's going on in the world. Things have really changed, and I believe it's time to provide some hope, basically, to put it mildly. I want to raise my daughter in a world where there is hope. So there are many more reasons for that, but I think that is probably the main reason that I'm here. So let's go right into happiness today. I have a few notes here. I will be referring to some notes off and on, just because it's easier for me to prepare a few things here and there. It's hard to go completely off script all the time, so we'll go with that. So let's begin by talking about happiness, which is a very, very loaded topic, especially right now. Let's talk about what it is, how to become happier, how happiness can even perhaps be rebellious or political, and more things along the way. So let's just jump right in. I want to start with a happiness definition. This is from Martin Seligman, actually, one of the founders of positive psychology, the positive psychology movement, which looks at people's strengths and what's working well, not problems and maladjustment and psychological disorders. Essentially, it's the opposite of all that. It's looking at more of the positive side of human nature and looking at our strengths. So Seligman says that happiness has three different, I would call them components. Today, I'm probably going to focus more on the moment to moment, but there are three generally components to the full spectrum of happiness. And the first one is your sense of subjective well-being from moment to moment. So subjective well-being from moment to moment, those are the positive emotions you feel. Everyone knows what happiness feels like, right? Because when you feel it, you know it. It's that sense of joy. Joy is a little bit more intense, but it's sort of that feeling of joy and satisfaction or pleasure even. And so that's this kind of fleeting, temporary emotional state that will change from moment to moment. And so that does include positive emotions. It's temporary, it's fleeting, emotions fade, and that is the first component. The second component is subjective life satisfaction. That's the overall kind of big picture view. So basically, do you feel good about your life and the choices that you have made in your life? So that one is a little bit more stable, I would say. It requires a little bit of self-reflection to look back on your life and say, I like the things that I've done. I like the goals that I've achieved or attained, and I like where I'm at in my life. So that is subjective life satisfaction. The last one is a sense of meaningfulness and purpose. So having a sense of meaning in your life, no matter what that might be. Are there things in your life that bring a sense of purpose and meaning to you personally? And it will be different for each person. There might be some common themes amongst several of us, but not all of us are going to feel that way, right? So maybe having children brings a sense of meaning for some folks and not for others. Others don't really necessarily want to pursue that path. They're going to find meaning in other ways as well. Now, I do also want to say you're not going to just find one thing in life that gives you meaning, right? We have a lot of things that give us meaning. And so that's just one example of that, is maybe having children, it's having pursuing a particular career that you are very passionate about, learning things like experiencing different things, different hobbies that we choose can be meaningful to us. Gardening, I mean, it can be very seemingly very small in the bigger picture, but some of these things are the things that can bring us meaning in our lives. All right. So now that we've defined happiness, I do want to say a little bit about money and happiness before we move on to some of the other areas, like how do we improve our happiness or increase it. Money does affect happiness. Now, money can't buy happiness. You've all heard that adage, and it is true to some extent. However, we all need a basic level of financial stability or financial comfort, I should say, to feel happy, generally speaking. So if you are struggling to survive, struggling to put a roof over your head, struggling to find a way to live safely or in a safe neighborhood, that will affect your happiness, right? That makes sense. And so we need a basic income to have safety, food, water, and experiences. Back in the day in the research, so in psychology research, it used to be, and I want to say this was probably way back in 2010, I'd have to go back and find the citation, but in 2010, it used to be that your happiness plateaus for most people. For the average person, your happiness would plateau at 75,000. And I laugh because 10 years later, they did the same study and happiness now plateaus at 500,000. So 500,000 now essentially is actually, this might be a little dated now because this was 2022. Killingsworth et al. They said the income at which your happiness plateaus has jumped to 500,000. So the average person, your happiness won't increase dramatically if your income goes up. Now, that's not going to hold true for the most miserable 15%. So the bottom of 15% of folks in happiness, they're not going to be affected by money as much. If you make more than that 500,000, you aren't likely to be happier. But that is a big number now. Obviously, things have changed. Inflation, all kinds of things have changed for humanity in the past 6 years, I would say. Well beyond that, but for sure. We can also be happier with money if we spend our money on experiences and not on items. Material objects will not bring happiness, no matter how many handbags people think they can buy that are exclusive and cost $30,000. It's not going to bring happiness. Experiences do help bring moments of that happiness. That's the subjective well-being. Another way that money can help with happiness is spending money on other people, right? So if you have money to donate, if you are in a position where you are wealthy enough to be able to give to others financially, that can actually boost your happiness somewhat if you are using your money to help other people. Maybe family, maybe friends, maybe starting a nonprofit and donating your money to worthy charities. All right. I do want to talk a little bit about what makes up happiness. I actually teach this to my college students when I teach personality and my introduction to psychology courses as well, because I think this is really important information. The theory, Lubomirsky et al. In 2005, in their article, their theory is that we have three different contributors to happiness overall in our lives. One is purely genetic, and you have a happiness set point, which is considered to be half of your happiness. So you have a kind of a baseline level of happiness based on your genes. So purely based on your genes alone. Now, I don't know if that sounds like a lot to you all or not a lot to others, but as I think about working in my practice with clients, I think that's really validating because some people, have you ever heard people say things like, happiness is a choice. You just need to choose to be happy. I'm just optimistic all the time. It's really invalidating to people with suffering from depression, I'll tell you that. That is extremely invalidating. And it actually lends support to this idea that there's a genetic influence to major depressive disorder and other disorders that affect our happiness. And then you don't, maybe folks don't feel like it's their fault, like they're as guilty for perhaps not feeling as happy as other people do. if you believe that you have a genetic set point to your happiness. And that does tend to be supported by happiness research in general. And we look across the lifespan, happiness does actually tend to be very stable. That's not to say that you can't become happier. I want to make sure that's very clear. But happiness does tend to be pretty stable, which does support that there's a fair influence of genes. So we each start at a different baseline of happiness. So individually, my baseline of happiness might be here, and somebody else's baseline of happiness might be here, way up or way down. And that is, again, that is based on your genes, your inherited genes. So the next contributor to our happiness is external circumstances. Now, Lubomirsky believes that's only 10% of our happiness. So that's things like events that happen to us, like job loss or marriage or having children, things like that. External circumstances only account for 10%. That doesn't sound like a lot. So that can sound maybe a little bit invalidating to folks who struggle with their external circumstances, but that is part of the theory. And the last section is intentional activities. So these are the things that you can change. So what are the things that we can do to boost our happiness? I will talk about that actually pretty soon. But intentional activities account for 40%. That's not bad. So, and actually it's pretty congruent with personality theory and research that we have in psychology that says your nature-nurture balance in your personality traits is about 50-50. It's about 50% genetic and about 50% environment. So that's good news. And I don't know if I'd say that's bad news. I would say that's pretty good news, because even though you might have a genetic influence on your personality, you also can change. You also have environmental influences. I mean, it can work both ways. But so because of that, again, looking at our personality and our happiness, that's pretty close to the 50-50 kind of numbers that we saw with personality. So 50% genetic, 40% intentional activities, 10% external circumstances, like, things that happen in our lives, like job loss, marriage, etc. Let's move on to the next section. How do we increase happiness? This is a big question. And a lot of people can get frustrated if they over-focus on becoming happy, right? Or if you focus on the fact that you're not happy, that can actually create more frustration and disappointment. So it's a little bit of a paradox, right? It's not so much that you necessarily want to focus on happiness, but you might want to focus more on living a meaningful life and not avoiding painful experiences, which is really paradoxical, right? So that is actually what I'm pulling from acceptance and commitment therapy. It's a form of CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. But I'm going to get into the nitty-gritty of some of the very specific actions and things that we can do to increase happiness. But do know that having a sense of meaning and developing a sense of your own personal meaning in life can be very, very powerful in increasing happiness. All right, let's go through some of these ways to increase happiness. One of them is gratitude. That's one of the top ways. Are there things in your life right now, even today, that you can be thankful for, that you can express gratitude for, that you feel gratitude for? It can be the big things to, I feel really grateful to have the family I have, or I feel really grateful to have the home that I have, or the friends that I have, right? So those are some of the bigger things, but it can also be smaller things. It could be very simple. It can be things like, I'm grateful for these wonderful trees that I see around me. Sometimes I feel that way when I look around and I look at the trees. I feel grateful for them. It can be something as simple as, I'm grateful that that stranger smiled at me today when I was walking to, I don't know, my job. It can be something like, I'm grateful for my physical health, or for the aspects of my body or the physical health that I have Even though I might be struggling with this health issue, at least, this part of my functioning is actually really going well. And I've never had to worry about this. So it can be a range of things. And it's not really meant to be an act of gratitude or showing gratitude internally. And this isn't necessarily towards other people. And certainly it can be wonderful to express gratitude to other people for what they do for you. And I hope that that's something that you would do too. But there's also something to be said for just feeling gratitude deeply as kind of an emotional experience. And in order for you to do that, you have to tap in a little bit more deeply. And you might even just take a deep breath and really kind of sit with something that you feel very grateful for. And it might be the bigger things, it might be the little things, but whatever it is, it's not just thinking of something and saying, okay, well, I'm grateful for that, right? And moving on with your day. It's deeper and it's more nuanced. So, maybe you think, I'm so grateful for my family because we get along really well and we love each other truly. And, finding specific things about your family or specific things about your day that have brought you that feeling of gratitude, and sitting with that feeling for a few seconds or a few moments, and just kind of allowing yourself to feel that can be very helpful and very powerful. Again, you can also express your gratitude to others for the things that they've done, for the things or for who they are. Doesn't have to be for their actions. It can sometimes just be for being themselves. So that's gratitude. The next one is compassion. And compassion is a little bit different from empathy. Compassion is caring for other people who are suffering. So it's a feeling of care for other people who are suffering. Empathy is actually putting yourself emotionally in their shoes and being able to feel what they feel. And sometimes that can be helpful, and sometimes it can cause you to feel overwhelmed as well. So it kind of depends. But compassion is being it's a bit more detached. Detached is kind of a negative word sometimes, but it's not meant to be a negative word. Compassion is feeling a little bit removed from the situation, but you feel care. You feel care for this person who is suffering. And it can be feeling compassion for someone around you who is going through something. Maybe they lost a parent or lost a job or something like that. Allowing yourself to feel compassion for others can actually help you feel a little bit more happy, which is, again, it feels a little paradoxical. But being a caring person can be a part of that process of increasing your happiness. It's just sort of what specifically about it is going to be helpful. And in this case, feeling caring for others. Now, there is something called compassion fatigue. If we look at the news all the time and we see things that are really, really negative, and we see the worst in human nature, we see a lot of cruelty, and we see a lot of people are suffering, and we hear about suffering every single day. You can get compassion fatigue, you can burn out, and you can get overwhelmed and shut down. And so we have a limited supply of compassion, which is not a bad thing. We just have a limited supply from day to day. And so we need to kind of make sure that we're, particularly with the media, that we make sure that we are aware of what's going on, but not necessarily over focusing on it, and spending too much time doom scrolling or reading a lot of those negative stories. So that's one of the kind of caveats to that idea of compassion. Is it's great to feel compassion for others. It can increase your happiness somewhat, but also you don't want to get mired in it. You don't want to get mired in the suffering. And you don't want to, we have a kind of like natural emotional limits to how much compassion that we can feel in a short amount of time in a day or whatever it is. And if you see negative news every single day, and you keep reading more and more stories about people being cruel to each other and suffering, it will deplete your compassion stores. So you kind of have to pull back a little sometimes, and not give as much energy to reading a lot of stories that are negative. So, and I'm not saying that you shouldn't be informed or that you shouldn't be paying attention to what's going on in the world, but be a little bit protective over how much time you spend doing that. Cultivating your strengths. And I can't speak to what your strengths are. Whatever it is that you're really good at, continue to work on that, right? I'm trying to think of some personal examples here. For example, I've been described as being very grounded, and I've tried to use that in my therapy practice to calm people who are in distress. And that's something that I have cultivated in myself, being grounded for myself emotionally, but also for others, and being able to serve as kind of a grounding force for other people who are suffering or in distress. And so that's something that I've cultivated over the years. I've also cultivated a deeper understanding of other people's experiences and being able to find the words to reflect that back to them in some way that can be helpful. That's part of something that I have worked on for many, many years as part of, graduate school and my training. But those are just some examples. But for you, it's going to be different. Maybe one of your strengths is that you're very creative in some artistic way, that you are really good at playing guitar, or you're really good at some kind of musical thing or some hobby. We all have our own strengths, and they are really important to recognize, to understand, and to develop. So for each person, that will be different. And I would encourage you to look at some of the things that you think might be your strengths and continue to develop those, because that does actually increase your happiness. Connection, that is the fifth one out of the top 5 in increasing happiness. Connection is really important. Human beings need social interaction. Now, connection is a big, broad word. Let's bring it down to the practical. We need more interaction or deeper interactions with others. So for some of us might be we need to just interact more often with other people. And for some of us, we need deeper connection. So that can mean that maybe we work on strengthening or deepening our connection to family members or friends, and spending more time with them. And for some, maybe that means being a little bit more vulnerable and sharing a little bit more with family and friends. For others, that might mean cultivating new friendships or developing new friendships, which takes a lot of energy. Maybe you have to find some kind of hobby that a lot of people get together to share and meet people through that way, clubs and groups and organizations. And so that's going to be different for each person, but connection really does improve our happiness. And that is also social support is a very strong protective factor to preventing suicide. So it also decreases depression, as you might expect based on what I just said. So connection, social support, these are things that we can work on in our lives to become happier. So maybe it's deepening the relationship with folks that you already have and being vulnerable. Maybe you share something that you weren't sure that you wanted to share because you were afraid. Or it could be that you are ready to try to develop new friendships at whatever stage of life you're at. So that might be something to consider for you. A few other things that can improve happiness. Optimism is something that can improve happiness. So looking at the bright side of things, having hope, being able to believe, holding the belief that things will get better can be protective and can improve our happiness or increase our happiness. Might be hard right now. I totally understand that. But there is so much good in the world. We don't necessarily see it all right now because a lot of it's behind the scenes. A lot of it is acts of kindness that go unnoticed or unseen by many people because it's not there for attention, right? Acts of kindness are not done for attention or for some sort of gain. They're done simply because we want to be kind, because just because. And so a lot of those acts are happening behind the scenes. They're not happening on the news, right? The vast majority of news is largely negative, and it is that way because it's attention grabbing. More positive news does not get as many clicks. Let's be real. So the news is going to focus on what's negative, what's scary, and what's fearful. So if you can, see if you can work really hard to protect or maintain a sense of hope, even in the face of chaos. All right, another one, fostering resilience. That means adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant sources of stress. You can do that through a myriad of ways. Take care of your body, mindfulness, strengthen your social connections, like I just talked about, being proactive at problem solving. But being able to adapt. And now we need it more than ever because the world is rapidly changing for many, many reasons and over the many, many domains and areas, technology, government, and sociocultural norms are shifting. And so all of these things are shifting around us. If we can adapt a little bit better to these changes, we will be happier. And so fostering resilience. So that is what resilience is: adapting well in the face of adversity, trauma, tragedy, threats, or significant source of stress. Whatever coping skills work for you, maybe you need to find new ones right now because they're not working anymore. But finding coping skills that help you become more calm, to calm your body down and your nervous system down. Sometimes that might just be a couple of breaths or telling yourself it's going to be okay in your mind mentally. For some people, that's going to be choosing to journal their thoughts. Maybe journaling is a coping skill that you might start to use. So again, fostering resilience is about finding new coping skills or strengthening your coping skills, the ways that you deal with stress. And we're not talking about excess. We're not talking about choosing to eat a lot or choosing to drink a lot or use substances to try to cope with stress. We're talking about the healthier ways that are going to benefit you in the long term. And maybe hobbies are part of that, coping with stress, so playing music or reading or, I don't know, some kind of community that you belong to. So fostering resilience. Another experience that can increase happiness is awe. This is the feeling we get when we encounter something vast that challenges our understanding of the world. And it's very humbling. And we feel small, but in a good way, yet very connected to everyone. It creates humility, curiosity, compassion, and it helps us feel connected. And it boosts your mood for weeks. How do we get that feeling of awe? Sometimes it's literally seeing something differently in the world. Flying on an airplane is probably the easiest way to say that, because when you fly in a plane, you look at the earth, you look down at the earth. If you're not blocked by all the clouds, which does happen, if you look down at the earth, it looks very small. You might even see the curvature of the world, of the earth. And when you're looking down, you say, wow, everything looks so small and everything is so vast. So you might get that feeling from looking at the earth from a plane. I actually experienced that feeling because I saw one of the volcanoes in Washington when I was flying to Seattle one time, and it was beautiful and it was massive. This massive volcano, it might have been Mount Rainier, I don't remember, Mount Baker, whatever it was rising from the earth, and from the plane, you could still see that it was really massive and it was really impressive. And I felt that feeling of awe. I took a picture. But you don't have to fly in a plane to feel awe. You can experience awe at a sunset or a sunrise, looking at the stars, old or ancient feeling places that you visit. if they're indigenous sites that have some sort of special meaning, or if there's ruins of ancient Greece or, ruins of particular aspects of culture, that can bring that sense of awe to us as well. We can also get it through nature, spending time in nature, whether that's blue spaces like lakes, rivers, and oceans, or green spaces like parks or trees or nature or grass or plains even. All of those ways we can experience awe, that feeling of that vastness we get when we encounter something that challenges our understanding of the world. I would guarantee you, I'd be willing to bet that every single person who goes up into space and looks down feels that awe. All right, the next one is self-compassion. Self-compassion is such a loaded topic, and it's actually really hard to put into words. So remember, if compassion is caring for the suffering of others, this is you caring about your own suffering and caring for yourself. If you make a mistake, or if you're just struggling, again, if you're just suffering, giving yourself compassion and treating yourself the way that you would a close friend if they were struggling. And sometimes that's just mentally with the voice that you use in your head to tell yourself it's going to be okay, or it's okay to feel this way. One of the biggest ways that I have worked on my own self-compassion over the years is to sit with my feelings. So when I become aware that emotions are coming up, now I have to be choosy about when I can experience this, because sometimes it's just not a good moment. But taking the time to sit with my emotions, and for me, I do that privately a lot of time. So if some emotion comes up, I give myself the time and space to allow that feeling. Sometimes there will be a lot of grief feelings that come up. Sometimes it will be feelings of sadness or feelings of gratitude that come up that I just want to sit with. Sometimes it will be a feeling of anger that I need to sit with. Sometimes it will be a feeling of disappointment. All of those feelings need space. We need to give them space to be felt. And for me, that has been really instrumental in increasing my self-compassion, is saying there's room for these feelings. I'm allowed to feel them. And not only am I allowed to feel them and I'm validating them, I'm going to prioritize allowing these feelings to come up and for me to feel them and maybe reflect on them too, and then let them go. So that's one big way that you can allow yourself self-compassion. So I get it. When you're in a work situation or you're around other people and something comes up because maybe someone says something that reminds you of someone who passed away in your life that is very dear to you, and you start to feel the sadness coming up. Maybe that moment isn't necessarily the best moment to feel that emotion or to express it, not to feel it, but to express it or allow it. Maybe it's not the best space to do that. But here's what I would suggest. If you're aware that those feelings are that close to the surface and they're starting to come up around other people, give yourself time and space to feel that emotion at another time when you feel more comfortable, maybe in private. So if you are aware that those emotions are coming up, give yourself some private space and time to actually allow those feelings. And sometimes journaling brings up those feelings too, and that might be another way to allow those feelings to come up and let them go. So again, that is my biggest tool for self-compassion, but also the voice that we use to talk to ourselves in our heads. You can be much gentler to yourself. You could say, it's okay to feel this way. You can say to yourself mentally, I'm okay. I'm going to be okay. I'm going to take care of myself. I'm going to do what I need to do to take care of myself. So talking to yourself in a much more gentle way can be really helpful. Health and wellness, of course, exercise and a moderate diet. I don't think it's super important to focus on specific diets, but just things in moderation in particular. but also exercise in moderation too. You don't want to run yourself ragged. So taking care of your body and your mind. Exercise improves blood flow to your brain, which actually improves cognition somewhat. Also, you just feel better after you exercise most times, just a little bit. Exercise does actually improve, so it decreases depression symptoms for folks with mild to moderate depression. It is effective. Exercise is effective. So on the flip side, it improves your happiness, and it makes sense, right? If it decreases your depressive symptoms, then it would increase your happiness. All right, forgiveness. That is something that is listed as being helpful. Here's the tricky part about forgiveness. No one else has the right to tell you that you have to forgive someone. That is a purely individual decision that you get to make for yourself. And actually, it reminds me of Tina Zion, who says in her book, one of her books, she says that when you are going through healing with some kind of betrayal that happened with a person, that you naturally want to forgive them when you are at the right stage of your healing. And I do kind of appreciate that mindset, because I was raised Mormon, and it's sort of like you're supposed to forgive. It was basically like a directive. You need to forgive someone when they harm you. You need to, like you must. And that felt really inauthentic, and that felt really hollow and controlling. And so I rejected that quite a bit for a very long time in my life. And so when I read Tina Zion's sort of comments that no one should ever tell you that you need to forgive someone, it was actually really refreshing to read that. And I agree with that forgiveness can be helpful. It can be, but you don't have to. And also, you will know for yourself individually if it's the right thing for you, if it's the right time. Mindfulness. I did talk about meditation in an earlier podcast, and I think I have two parts. It was a two-part podcast. I've talked a lot about meditation. Mindfulness can be really helpful. It's just being present in a non-judgmental way. We often get so caught up in our lives. We get so caught up in future planning, future worrying, past ruminating, past dwelling, that we often forget the present moment. And, if we're working a job all the time to try to support your family, it's also really hard to be present when you're with your family because you're tired. And so mindfulness is something that you can't be 100% present all the time. Our minds cannot handle that level of presence. You just can't. That's sort of one of the limitations of being human, is that we are going to be in our heads sometimes. We are just going to be in our heads sometimes and not present. But if we can be a little bit more present, that will benefit us in the long term. That being present with ourselves and our families and our friends in the moments that we have together, it can be really rewarding. And so I would suggest that you gently, if you notice that your mind is sort of straying when you're with another person and you're trying to engage with them and connect with them, just gently bring yourself back. Say, oh, okay, I'm having a thought. So just mentally, you say, okay, I'm thinking again. I'm going to be present, or bring it back to the present moment. So just be kind of gentle with yourself about that. You don't need to be judgmental, because again, we all have moments where we're not present. Every single one of us. All right. And the last one on my list to increase happiness is savoring. Appreciating the enjoyment of any experience. And that actually goes right back to mindfulness, because when you notice that you're enjoying something, or an experience, or a moment, you can prolong it, you can augment it by noticing that it's enjoyable. It's like savoring. Again, that goes back to food. When you take a bite into a delicious cheesecake or margarita pizza or, whatever your favorite food is, sushi roll, you just bask in that moment of joy. You just kind of bask in it. And it actually does boost your mood from moment to moment. To actually and prolong it is to notice how much you enjoy that moment. So whenever you're enjoying something, see if you can kind of just notice it and deepen it by kind of basking in it and say, wow, this moment is beautiful. This moment is delicious. This moment is wonderful. And that is called savoring. There's research on that in psychology as well. So those are some ways to improve happiness. I do want to talk a little bit about how being happy can be seen as political in some ways. Right now, we are living in a very difficult time, and there are systemic inequalities happening and have been for a while, but there are we're really being, the inequality is really being highlighted right now and increased in some areas. Discrimination and systemic inequality can really affect an entire nation's happiness. So if we look at the UN's ranking of the happiest countries of the world, they look at happiness in a few different ways. So it's not quite the Martin Seligman definition. They look at things like social safety nets, lower income inequality, and typically higher gender equality. And their governments tend to be perceived as less corrupt and instead operating for the people. Finland has topped the list at least for 8 years, I think now, has been the number one happiest country in the world, largely because of all those things. Lower income inequality, higher gender equality. And they perceive their government to be working in their best interest as the people. I think a lot of Americans right now feel quite the opposite about our government. I think some of us even feel like our government is out to harm us at this stage, or at the very least does not care. And so the US, unsurprisingly, does not ever top the list, by the way. I think we're in the, I think this year we were the 15th. We were in the 20s at some point, I believe last year, but we're definitely not in the top 10. And it is for some of those reasons. We have really high income inequality. And I don't know that a lot of folks feel like the government is operating for us. And we don't have great social safety nets, no federal leave for family leave. It's all state operated. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of that piece of things. So if we look at it from that perspective broadly as a society, there are things we can do to bring more happiness to folks. And that is to make our country better, make our country more equal and more fair, and to provide some of those social safety nets, and to lower income inequality. Now that is a lot, right? That takes a lot of change. Can we do it? We'll see. But I hope so, because I want my daughter to live in a better world than what we have right now. I'll tell you that. So it can be political to decide that we want folks in our country to be happy and to provide the things that the people in our country need to be happy. So we can be activists in that way. But on the individual level, if you think about systemic inequality, finding happiness within means that others cannot control your sense of well-being. Whether that's individually and your partner or your family members, or socioculturally and referring to systems and institutions in society, if they control your happiness, then you have no power. So think about that. So again, I don't want to go too far into thinking that maybe systems are meant to keep you scared and poor and, scrambling for scraps. But if they were, nothing would be more dangerous than if you within had your own internal sense of happiness that was not changed by others, because that means that you are empowered. That means that you are that you find the power within yourself rather than looking externally for happiness. So my note about that, again, if we look at happiness as political, what could be more powerful than your happiness coming from within, not being affected by people who maybe don't have your best intentions in mind? So that can be very, very, very empowering. And yes, it can be political. Excuse me. So if you empower yourself to find happiness within, rather than be completely dragged down by the state of the world in every moment, you can't be controlled by fear, guilt, or shame. I'm going to say that again. If you empower yourself to find happiness within, rather than be completely dragged down by the state of the world in every moment, you cannot be controlled by fear, guilt, or shame that other people may try to use on you. So it might even be seen as rebellious or subversive in some ways to be happy in the face of systems that are, whether purposeful or not, might create a lot of suffering. And it might be the first step in empowering yourself to change those systems. It's not indifference and it's not sadism. You're not pulling back and saying, I don't care about other people. That's not what happiness is when it comes from within. Happiness from within is saying, I take responsibility for my happiness in life. I have the power to change myself. And maybe after that, the power to change the world. Protect your joy and happiness. Protect it. Continue to be present and loving in the face of a world that sometimes appears chaotic, disconnected, and cruel. This is not indifference. You have every right to be happy. You have every right to be happy. And maybe you can also help others find happiness within as well in some way. So again, if we're looking at things in a little bit of a bigger picture kind of way, but individually, it starts with the individual. So if you can learn to find happiness from within and not look to others to make you happy, you're already taking a huge step at empowering yourself, finding power within. And that is truly growth. That is growth. So I want to bring it to the personal now and talk about my own happiness to maybe give you some example of how this can look. Oddly, paradoxically, because the world has gotten more, there have been a lot of sudden, scary changes in the world in the past few years. But paradoxically, I've been happier in the last 3 years than ever in my life, even with everything that's going on. Now, I'm not saying I don't get scared or angry about what's going on in the world. Absolutely do. I do. Even in the midst of things, though, and even in the midst of even some, health things cropping up around for me a little bit here and there, I have become happier in general and more satisfied. And for a while, I had to, so there are a few reasons. For me, something that brings me a lot of meaning now in the past 4 years since we had our daughter is being a mother. I didn't know. I have to say, I did not expect that. I did not expect that I would be more content and satisfied with life after I had a child. I did not expect that. I thought it was going to be hard, but it helped me feel like there was a little puzzle piece that was put into place in my life in a way that made me feel more whole and complete And I can't really describe that any further than that, just to say that it helped me feel more complete. And it did bring more meaning into my life to have this new role. And I have a lot of things in my life that bring me meaning. And that has been really powerful for me. And also increasing my happiness is finding a lot of different things that bring me meaning. And being a mother is one of those areas that has brought me a lot of meaning and has also helped me increase my happiness. Now, some of the research actually does say that when you have kids, you're less happy. And a lot of that has to do with lack of sleep and lack of support for parents when they have children. But for me personally, it has increased my happiness in the long term. In the short term, yes, of course. In the first 6 months, I was so tired. I was not sleeping in, like fully throughout the night. We were waking up to feed our daughter. And so, yes, of course, exhaustion absolutely affects mental health. But after that period of adjustment, I can absolutely say that I am happier than I was 4 or 5 years ago. I've also had to kind of grapple with this idea that I deserve to be happy, even in the face of suffering, even knowing that there is suffering in the world. And I'll give you a very specific example because this came up with the Epstein files being released in, late January, early February of this year. That really threw me for a loop. I was really just deeply, deeply disturbed and upset. And I remember thinking, if we know that this suffering has been going on and is going on in the world, there are people in the shadows or behind the scenes doing these horrific acts of assault and torture and trafficking, why do I deserve to be happy knowing that this is happening? And so I really had to fight, but kind of grapple with my belief around that. And come to terms with the reality that we will always have suffering in the world. This does not mean we ignore it or don't do anything about it. That is not what I'm saying. But we do need to protect our happiness. And that is something that I've come to believe. I think I used to believe this was sort of a litmus test for being a good person, is that you suffer along with everybody else, that you are all in it together. So you all feel miserable together, right? That has shifted actually really recently for me. That shifted probably this year because I've thought about this belief. And this idea that if people are suffering somewhere, I don't deserve to be happy is a belief that was pretty deep and deep-seated. And I'm like, well, how can everybody just be walking about their day and going about their lives when they know that Jeffrey Epstein and all these people created these horrific acts against, children and women and infants. And so I started to realize that I did have this belief that perhaps me individually and others should not be happy if there is suffering in the world. And I realized that's really sad because that would mean that I don't deserve to be happy ever, because there will always be some suffering in the world. So the conclusion I came to is that there is suffering in the world. It's not that we don't need to do anything about it. We can do things where we feel like we can, right? If you have time to offer others, if you have kindness to offer others, if you have money to offer others, if there are things that you can do, if you can write to your senators, whatever it is you feel like you can do to help the situation, to help ease other people's burdens, absolutely we should be doing that. But we also need to love ourselves and to allow ourselves to be happy. We need to protect our happiness. I feel very strongly about that we need to protect our happiness. And that doesn't mean that we're not going to feel disturbed, sad, grief, and horror at what we see in the world. I will still experience those things too when we see the news and see some of these horrific things that are going on. But we also need those moments of joy just as much. We need those moments of joy. We need those moments of happiness and connection and presence as a counter to that. And so I am becoming more protective over my happiness and my time and my energies, and what I use my time for. I've set more boundaries. And so that's something that you might want to consider for yourself as well. What do you believe about other people's suffering and your own happiness? I had to grapple with this idea that if other people are suffering somewhere, then I shouldn't be happy. And I don't believe that anymore. But I had to work through some of my belief, that sort of core belief that I had around I don't deserve to be happy because other people are always suffering. There's always someone who's suffering. So I had to work through that. But some other things that have been helping is gratitude. I feel very grateful for the things that I have in my life. I have a wonderful, wonderful wife. I have a wonderful, wonderful family. I love my daughters. I have a dog daughter and a human daughter and a cat son, a new cat. We got a cat a couple months ago. I have abundance in a lot of different ways in my life. I have a lot of things to be grateful for. And I just love nature. I love trees. I love small moments where people just smile and just a genuine connection moment. It could be something as simple as a hello. It could be something as a brief interaction where we smile at each other. That feels good to me. Sometimes I can get a burst of energy from that. And so, I try to find things that I'm grateful for pretty regularly. And that has been really helpful for me as well in the past 3 years. I allow my emotions and I validate them. I process through them through either words, writing, or art, and I let them go. As I said, that's actually a way to show yourself self-compassion, is to allow your feelings. I try to deal with things as they come up. Now, this is also kind of paradoxical. Don't avoid the hard things that you need to deal with, right? So I think a lot of people now in these generations are struggling with ancestral shame and passing down abuse and incest and things. And also maybe just bad parenting. May not even be as extreme as abuse, but could be just kind of not great parenting. And I think right now a lot of us have the opportunity to change that. And for some of us, that means we have to heal old wounds. That means we have to go back to memories that maybe bring us shame. Because I definitely have those too, and I've had them come up as well. But I've chosen to be more conscious of my behaviors. And sometimes there will be interactions that you have with someone that will trigger you into rage or, feeling victimized or feeling something, and it doesn't quite match the situation. Like your feelings are really intense, and maybe the situation doesn't necessarily elicit that, but you have that experience because of your past, because of something you've experienced. That is very telling. That is something that means you have some unfinished business, perhaps, from the past that you might need to deal with. And so when you deal with the unpleasant things from your past, or things that are, that you're very reactive to, that might be lingering sort of emotional wounds from when you're really young, typically from childhood or adolescence, give yourself time to heal those. Give yourself the space to heal those own wounds and deal with your stuff. Deal with that unfinished business. Because even though it doesn't feel good to go back and revisit shameful memories or things that felt sad or hard or unfair, taking the time to allow that healing is really powerful. It is really powerful. It can improve your happiness. So in the long term, it will. Maybe not in the moment. It's going to feel hard. It's going to feel tough. It's going to feel difficult and emotionally unpleasant, but don't avoid it. Don't avoid the work. I also, again, focus on meaning in my life, family, love, learning new things, growing and developing my own intuition, culture, making music, meditating, all kinds of experience. I love learning about culture. I love learning about a lot of different things. I love anthropology. I love history. I love travel. And so there are so many things that bring me meaning. And so I feel very grateful for all of those things that bring meaning in my life. And for some of us. I will say this though, in my 20s, I didn't have it all figured out, obviously. In my 20s, I was pretty depressed and I was struggling off and on with that. And I was struggling with meaning. I was trying to figure out, and that's sort of the journey that we all have. We're all trying to find meaning in our lives. And I feel like I've come to a place now where I have a lot of things that bring me meaning. But it wasn't easy and it took time and energy and effort. So put in the time to understand, to learn about yourself and what brings you meaning. It's going to be a lot of trial and error. It's going to be trying new hobbies, things that you just feel kind of pulled toward, and then see what happens with that. Maybe it'll lead you to something else, maybe not that activity, but then you find through that some other activity that's even more meaningful to you. It's a journey and it's going to take some time. If you haven't found all the ways that if you don't feel like you have a strong sense of meaning in your life, just hang in there, because if you give yourself the space to explore your personality and yourself, you will find yourself, you will find it. I still do feel like I have compassion for others and their suffering. Even, due to government laws and things in place and the way that, ICE, and it is quite a horrific past couple of year that since Trump's been in office. But I'm really trying to figure out how to best use my skills right now. Certainly I teach, but I think there's more there. So I'm still figuring things out too. And I think we all are. I do have a lot of hope though. And I think that that's something really powerful as well in moments like these. I think we need to hold on to our hope too. Not just our happiness, protect your happiness, but protect your hope too. And ultimately, to close out, the path to happiness is really circuitous. It's not easy. Of course, these words, yes, everything sounds easy, but it's really a process. And I believe it involves finding meaning. A lot of this has to do with finding meaning and finding the things that bring you joy, finding the hobbies, finding the things that bring a spark to you. And so a deeper, loving connection to ourselves and others really doesn't hurt either. So whatever it takes for you to figure out what that looks like for you, you can engage in any myriad of activities, any activities that you think would be helpful. I just listed the ways that I feel like I improved my happiness or increased it. But there's other ways that, activities you can incorporate in your own lives. So see what sounds helpful to you and decide what you think you want to work on to increase your own happiness. We don't need to chase after happiness itself, but just be present, open up, and do what matters, and figure out what that looks like. It's going to be very individual for each of us. But I will say this, each of you deserves to be happy. And I'll leave it at that. Take care. Until next time.